Hey everybody, we're at week 3 of this training series we're doing of being emotional in an unemotional professional world, and we left you with a ton of content in week 2. So week 3, hopefully we'll promise to make it a little bit lighter, and we'll look forward to some more feedback. So there was tons of questions and tons of coaching that came out of last week. So I really appreciate everybody that reached out. One of the things that we may start to look at is some closed forums. And as that begins to develop, you'll hear some more about that. Right now it's in a holding pattern, but for right now, just keep reaching out, and there'll be some more information to come. So last week we talked about identity and role, and developing your identity, how your identity is set and how you perform in each role compared to your identity. And there's been a ton of questions about that. So just a reminder that we will coach on that from a team perspective and an individual perspective. We'll come and speak if you have an event coming up on that specific topic if you'd like. It takes a fair amount of work, but it's extremely enlightening and very successful for teams that address it. So if that's something that you'd like to go back and listen to, it's in week 2, and take a listen because it's impactful, and my team is prepared to help you walk your way through that. But like we addressed last week as well, if you're not in a place to address it at this point, I'm sure it'll surface at a later date as well. So let's talk about this week. We're going to talk about practice makes progress. And the reality is that if you've made it this far in the training and you've watched the videos building up to this one, or maybe you've popped on this one and you decide to go back, we have all heard the adage, practice makes perfect. And the reality is that in this, really in anything, but specifically in this is more of a journey. So I had a mentor of mine say to me at some point, it's not practice makes perfect, it's practice makes progress. And I think that when, whether you journal and write down about your journey, or you keep notes in your calendar. My dad used to keep all of his calendars, and he would write down not only the things he had to do, but then the things that got done during the day. And it was a little bit more of like a journal for him. I keep an actual book, and I also keep a calendar like my dad did. In the day and age of our electronic devices, sometimes that's a little bit more advantageous. But whatever it is, sometimes it's worth going back and revisiting along with setting your future goals. So practice is a progression is what we're looking for, rather than a perfection. A perfection is almost along the lines of what we were groomed to be, and it takes away from the authenticity that we're looking for, that allows us to bond with not only our teammates but our clients and our personal connections, kind of those 3 pillars that we've been working with. So let's talk about leaning in. I read a book from Sheryl Sandberg a few years ago that's actually titled Lean In, and she had some great topics. If you haven't read the book, it's a great listen to. But here's the takeaway to it, and then I'm going to add to it a little bit more. You have to lean into the people around you. I have, in many of the reflections that have happened throughout my career, and when we start to reflect on what makes us better employees and better managers, better personal friendships, significant others, spouses, parents, all of those things, you start to kind of reflect on the type of relationships that you've had that have worked and haven't worked. For me, there was some, I didn't have a gender gap. I take that back. I had a biological father who didn't think that women should be able to do certain things. And I then had a fantastic set of role models who didn't see that line and were the more influential people for me. I have a fantastic set of uncles who think that I can do anything and don't see that line. I also have brothers who don't see that line, and I got a dad along the way that never saw that line. And it took me a long time to understand that I was, in the generation I was growing up in, I was the oddity. I didn't realize that there was such a gap. So my challenge to you is that you have to actually lean into these relationships, and leaning in almost makes you vulnerable because the people on the other side of the relationship have to be able to see you lean in, and it makes us need to help the other side. You have to be able to be authentic. You have to be able to be emotional. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a gender difference. It could be any, even a simple friendship. When you start to lean into that relationship and you become a support, whether that be holding space, like we talked about in the bonus video last week, or an actual support system. You become a mentor. You become, whatever that relationship means to both of you, you become invested. And that's hard for a lot of people. We're busy. Taking something on our plates extra just sounds like a monumental task. But I think that in those moments, you start to prioritize what those things are, and it makes how we perform in our roles a little bit different. So as these videos start to kind of go on, and these are not an infinite number of videos, but we're back to the identity and role. So what you don't choose to confront and address in terms of identifying where you're at in identity and role, you're going to start to struggle to be able to lean into these relationships because you're going to be overwhelmed. And it's going to be an unsurmountable task to be able to lean into every relationship and understand. I'm not suggesting that you do that. However, there are some that you do need to be able to lean in on. The other side of that is looking for relationships that you are going to need a little bit more from. This will kind of lend itself to being in a room of people that you are not the smartest one in the room. So there's a couple different versions of this. You're most like the 5 people that you surround yourself. If you're the smartest one in the room, you're standing in the wrong room. All of those, quick quips that we've all heard of. However, there's a lot of validity to that. One of my favorite ones that always has stuck with me was one that my dad used to kind of green into me, was that it's lonely at the top. And I never fully understood that until I had started to run my own company and then started coaching people that were running their own company. It's hard to understand the pressures of that. So you then don't necessarily have a mentor, but you start to surround yourself with like struggles. And that's when you need to be able to lean into those relationships because they are the same ones that will be able to lean in with you. And while you will offer some kind of assistance, they will be able to give when you need it as well. There comes a threshold in all of our businesses where, from a scalability standpoint, you can't wear all of the hats. If you continue to wear all of the hats, you're not doing your business justice, and you need an outside consultation. For some of us, that's an accountant. For some of us, that's an attorney, a trainer, a business coach. It comes in all kinds of different faces, but you have to, in order to scale your business, you need a resource that can unemotionally look at your business and say, hey, I think I see this. This is how we scale. And that's where the advantage of being unemotionally attached in business comes out. However, the relationships of the struggle and where to find those and where to trust those, there is still an emotional connection. So it requires you to lean in. It takes the stoicness of shoulders back, chin up, no crying in baseball, to that body language piece again, where we have to almost physically lean in and understand that we are listening to the person. We are invested in what is happening next. For some people that are at the beginning stages of their career or have taken a stretch or risk and are looking for someone to mentor them, it is their visual to you're doing the right thing. I'm here for you. Same things that we would do for friends or even maybe our children. It's the handout or the lean in that makes us vulnerable, but at the same time is integral in making others successful. It's the put out in the world what you need so that you can get it back. So if it's something that you think that maybe you're too overwhelmed to address or too overwhelmed to give back at this point, then let's talk about what that looks like for you. Let's talk about why your plate feels so full. If you think that you're in a place where you are looking for someone to lean in and help you, then that might say a little bit more about you, and we can maybe help with that, and then help find somebody to help mentor you as well. It's a little bit of a two-facet piece. That brings us to the next stage in the emotional side of this, and this is something that a lot of people say, oh, I can do this, but then when you put them in a room, it's hard to do, and it is the ability to conflict. I've been in a couple meetings recently where people are very quick to say, oh, our team does that, we can do that. But as we start to simulate it and we start to bring it up, the tension gets super high. And it's hard to take more than constructive feedback. It's hard to give it. For some of us, it might be hard to give, but it's hard to take it as well. And that's not, hey, I think that it would be better if you do this, but really get down to figuring out, for a company that's in growth or a company that's struggling, this is where your problems are without assigning blame. And again, that's a culture shift. We talked last week, because it was so content heavy, that culture shift is a heavy weight that we hope is not a burden. And if it's done properly, it's not a burden. This is one of the things that we do, if done successfully, the ability to conflict, to grow, will not be done in a negative connotation. So for lots of people, if you sit down with your team and say, can we conflict? Can we share ideas successfully without getting in an argument? Lots of teams will say, oh yeah, we can do that. We can share ideas. But if you actually put it into play, take a look at your team and see what actually happens. A lot of it has to do, again, with the body language. Some of it has to do with the actual tactical ideas that come out of changing it, or if they're true ideas. Do you get the bobblehead response out of your team? That, oh yeah, yep, we get it, and 20 minutes out the door, nothing is going to change? Or do you actually see measurable change start to happen because people have identified that they're there to help each other, not that somebody's job is on the line? So the ability to conflict, and again, this is another workshop that we do a fair amount, especially with companies that are now looking at their end of year, where within the last 90 days, you've decided you're all out going for it because you're going to hit your goal, or we've had to modify the goal, or we need a different strategy for next year. Now is the time to sit down with your team and say, we need some help. And this might be a good place to go. The next one is failure. And failure is something we all would like to say we're good at, but not enough people admit to. So this probably is along the same lines. These are all good personal relationship things too, right? So we'd like to say we can conflict with our significant other or our kids, and everybody still sits down at the family table and we're good with it. Same thing with failure. Well, we tried it, it didn't work, now what? It kind of depends on what the stakes are. But for failure in business, if you are not failing enough, then you have to decide if your calculated risks are big enough. Are you dreaming big enough? I like to talk to companies with owners or implementers that have a dreamer and a doer. Sometimes that can be the same person, depending on the size of the company. If you're a smaller company, you're just getting started, that can sometimes tend to be one person. If it's a bigger company or a partnership, you tend to see that those two roles become different. But if you aren't failing and everything that you're doing is a success, and monumental success, and you're loving it and everything's great, then please send me a message, because I love the fact that you're watching my videos too. But at the same time, if we're not failing enough, we're not risking enough, we're not pushing that bubble. If we almost put ourselves in a great big bubble of options, and we just live in that bubble and we never stretch it, we never make it bigger, eventually we're going to run out of oxygen. Eventually we're going to run out of space